So first off, wanted to, say congratulations for, the big news recently with regards to Auth0 and the acquisition by Okta. I think that's, pretty, amazing outcome, and, would love to, also, just quickly on that note, have you talk a little bit about something that I saw you do that I thought was, a really great way of being able to ensure some continuity with your community. And that was that, you put out this blog post, right? For those who haven't read it, I think that we can drop a link into the chat so you can take a look at it. But we'd love for you to talk about, why you felt the need to put this out, and, why you, made a point to actually, kind of go this extra mile.
Yeah, I think the context and context behind the post was really making sure that we addressed developer concerns. I think when the announcement hit, there were already some Hacker News posts that, oh my God, I'm on the free tier with Auth0, they're going to shut me down, right? Like they've become an enterprise company. So it was really to address that sentiment directly, and just assuring our customers, specifically developers, because we do have a free tier and we have lots of developers, whether it's for hobby projects or for early stage companies. They essentially are using our platform, and so we wanted to make sure we address that head on. And so, again, similar. If you're building developer products, this is fairly common. You want to be transparent, you want to be upfront, and you want to make sure that you address that community so that you can remove any anxiety. So that was the context.
Yeah, I like how you say that that's fairly common. I would argue that it's probably not common enough. But I hear you. I think that notion of transparency is, and that notion of trust and building trust, and the simple ability to follow through on commitments or promises that you make. It's amazing how that one aspect really helps to define your community.
Yeah.
So, wanted to, we jumped kind of right in, and I think that this was, something where I wanted to kind of get to the meat of some of these topics, but, through the, way of, for folks that aren't familiar with your background, you spent prior to, Auth0, you were at DigitalOcean for a while. Many of the folks that are, going to be watching, and participating in this event are probably familiar with DigitalOcean as well, in terms of the developer community and the developer trust that they were able to build over the years, right? And so I'd love to, hear from you, having kind of gone through that experience at DigitalOcean, and seeing the impact it had on the developer community and the way in which independent developers could get up and running so quickly, and the takeaways that you had, and, kind of how you were able to bring some stuff forward to Auth0, but maybe some things that you also kind of lessons learned that you maybe did a little bit differently.
Yeah, so maybe starting, let's start with DigitalOcean first, and I'll share what was common and maybe what was different. I think, they really focused from the very early days, from the founding of the company was, we had this, the AWS was leading the market, created and started leading the market. And so, the founders found this very specific audience that wasn't addressed, which is developers. And they had developers from, people, students who are just starting out to people who are learning about DevOps, all the way to established companies also. And so I think the biggest things that they did really, really well was building, I think content was a big part of the DigitalOcean flywheel. And the content was really about, helping developers be successful, whether it was, they're launching a WordPress website or they wanted to learn about containers, right? So, so content was really good. And I think we at DigitalOcean, we built this really authentic community. And what I mean by that is we were fairly active in our feedback forums, fairly active on support tickets, social. I mean, I was answering questions of customers or developers would post on social channels. So because we had this feedback loop for them, we really created this bottoms up following, if you will. And I think, really DigitalOcean was a product-led growth company. And so it was all about how do you put out these products, get organic adoption, and then continue to grow from there. So community content were really key there.
One thing that I'd add to that is that, it resonates with actually the previous conversation and something that Ed said, which was, I liked it. It was be opinionated, but don't be selfish. And I think that DigitalOcean did a phenomenal job at that, where like the opinionated designs of being able to have those like, kind of pre-built configurations was so amazing for developers. But at the same time, there was a willingness and the ability for, developers to come in and kind of, construct their own stack if they needed to. So there wasn't that like kind of myopic perspective of, no, this is the only way it can be done. But it was like, hey, look, we've tried a bunch of stuff and, we're going to make it easy for you.
Yeah, and on the selfish part, actually, I'll share a really funny story. We had a lot of developers who actually, even if they were building on Amazon, they were coming to consume content at DigitalOcean. It was fairly common, and so when we met the AWS World teams, at conferences, KubeCon or whatever, they would come up to us and say, "Oh my God, we love your content! Like we print some more users of your content, right?" So again, same concept of, if this idea of like, if you build authentic information, content, or tools just to help developers, like that goes a really long way in building a brand. And so, back to sort of some of the themes around trust, authenticity, those things really help. So.
Absolutely. Now, so as you kind of, transitioned into, Auth0, and I know you kind of came in after, they were, pretty far past the kind of like, early community building, right? They had established community, but I think that you kind of, took on, at a time where they were really looking to make sure they continued to balance that like early adopter community and the, kind of, freemium tier community, and balance that with the enterprise.
Yeah.
Right. Because obviously, like I think that, Auth0, I've known folks there for a long time. They've always had, a perspective that they wanted to, be an, enterprise platform that was going to, scale and grow to the needs of the largest customers. And so what were some of the observations that you had of, kind of coming in and seeing where they were at and, what were the opportunities? What were some of the things that you really wanted to make sure you kept an eye on?
Yeah, I think, so at Auth0, there were two motions there. So, the freemium sort of self-service is product-led. So a lot of, lots of funnel optimization and tuning through software. But Auth0 established sort of a sales motion very early on. And I think that's really healthy. Sometimes companies do that much later, but I think they had a really good balance of making sure that, well, we are going to start landing larger customers. They have different needs. And so, the balance at Auth0 was making sure we are not messing up the freemium tier, the self-service, even simple things like making sure like the pricing scales well. So for example, when I arrived, I know the first two tiers had this nice scaling, and then literally there was an enterprise tier.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, whoa, this is jarring for customers. And we've tuned that over the last year and a half. You can see that we've made a few pricing changes to make sure that there's growth. But speaking of the enterprise components, maybe just, when you start selling to enterprises, and I know some of this has been covered in previous panels too, is that, or at least in the panel before us, they talk about being put in a box. You now have to deal with analysts and helping educate them. So with enterprises, yeah, you have to do those things. Like, we spend a lot of time with Gartner, Forrester, and Cole, and amongst others, and then also building enterprise readiness features. So everything from compliance, even simple things that we take for granted. But enterprise is a very complex team-based access and role, so you have to sort of build that. And everything has to be auditable. So you have to build auditing into everything, right? So those are the types of things that, we had to balance that out with the product teams, where it wasn't about just launching the latest passwordless capability or feature or MFA, it was also about making sure, well, we really have to mature our capability and how we talk to our customers. Even things like having support plans and premier support plans, because when you start moving up market, there are additional requirements that you need to
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's just like, the one that always comes up is, how do you actually within your, platform, show value, right? And this is, ultimately it comes down to some type of, reporting or, kind of charting of, usage, something that is, like makes it so that the, like you think about it as a requirement for a large organization. Like they have so many tools, they have so many, products that they use, and how are you making it so that your organization, your sales organization, your support organization can actually show that value very quickly and easily, based on kind of usage statistics, or based on some type of data that is going to be that thing that your internal champion takes and says, look, no, this is really valuable to us.
Yeah.
It's so imperative that you don't think about when you're just saying, well, I want to have good ergonomics for an individual developer so that there's low friction for their usage.
Yeah.
It's like, yes, and that single developer probably is not going to be in the room when you're having those like larger sales conversations. And you can ignore either one, but it means that you need to be mindful of both.
Yeah, I think we even. I think reporting is a really good example. The other example I would use is larger companies, as you mentioned, they just have so many different tools that are already working. So one of the insights we had was, in addition to building a reporting, was just integrating to existing tools. Yeah. Just some practical examples, integrating into Splunk, Datadog. Yeah. And Sumo Logic and tools like that just made it easy, because some of our customers, well, I'm already using Datadog, or I may be using Splunk already. I don't want to log into your dashboard to just understand the authentication events. So just pipe them over there. And so I think those are some other ways where you can quickly add value, essentially meeting developers where they're already sort of using the tooling and the like. So that's
No, and I mean, I think that's like such a huge point of this like kind of transition from like that initial product market fit and like an early stage of like when you're building a community, to that notion of like transitioning to building a platform, and being able to engage with not only community, but thinking about the community also including an ecosystem, right? Where it's like all of a sudden you're thinking about in the context of, very seldom is anybody able to build a kind of end-to-end encapsulated, I do everything type product, right?
Yeah.
It hardly ever happens.
Yeah.
And more often than not, your success is going to be dictated by, how easy is it for people to insert you into an existing environment, and then how easy is it for them to, have really well-defined inputs and really well accessible outputs, right? So that like you're going to be in the middle somewhere, and like how do you make it so that you're, being a kind of a good neighbor with all of those folks. So yeah, I mean, I think this is something that I saw like Auth0 do extraordinarily well. Is it's the integrations that matter, right? Looking at and seeing them, before it becomes a blocker for a customer.
Yeah.
So I think that now in your kind of experience with as you scaled and as you grew those integrations at Auth0, were there any gotchas that kind of came up? I know that like Auth0 has a very strong culture of kind of API first and thinking about that. But like what advice would you give, or what lessons did you learn as you were kind of scaling that out?
Yeah, I think for a couple of things on integrations, we started integrations like sort of on an ad hoc basis, and so the first problem was they were kind of all over the place. So like just one example is when you're doing integrations, you kind of have to think about discoverability and finding the integrations at the right place and the right time. So we had integrations all over the place. So last year we said, this doesn't make sense. We need to have a good place to discover them. So we created a catalog. So that was important. The other part, I think, with integrations, especially if you are API first, is trying to make them self-service. So our first integration, actually, I would say our first 40 to 50 integrations were all fairly like, we had to handhold them, and we were maintaining them and making sure that they are current and nurturing that. But it doesn't scale beyond that. And so we've been investing a lot in sort of self-service tooling, so that other integration partners can just get going on their own, because they don't need us for everything. And then the second part is, you can actually scale. You can add lots of integrations in a fairly quickly way, and you can automate. In our case, things like making sure that integrations are secure, there was supportability. You have to think about end of life. If we had an integration and somehow it was being deprecated or end of life,
right,
we need to make sure that we can gracefully also propagate that to our customers. So quite a few considerations, and automating them actually helped, because you get standard procedures to onboarding new integration. So I think just thinking about self-service there is kind of critical. And I think the last part would be just, it's similar to discoverability, but it's just making sure, these integrations are essentially software products. So having a product detail page with relevant information about, how you handle support. Is there a cost to using the integration? Are there any prerequisites for it? Are also kind of like really, really important. And I mean, some of this stuff is very relevant if you're building ecosystems, especially.
Yeah.
But so they apply there, and so these are some of the things that we had to bring in and change, and it's still a journey. We're not done.
But I mean, I think that this is part of like one of the points that I make often when I'm working with folks, and this was definitely something that I pushed strongly. Recently at Launch Darkly while I was there, as well as while I was at GitHub, was you need to think of your integrations as part of your product.
Right.
And you need to think about it in the same way that you would think about for folks who haven't read Mick Kirsten's book Project to Product, highly recommend. But it's that notion where you need to think about integrations as not just a project that you're executing on, and then there's like this end state where it's like ships and then it's done.
Yeah.
You need to think about it the same way you think about your products, where always looking at what are opportunities for innovation or updating. Maybe that's further integration. Maybe that's making sure that you're incorporating that into just your test suite, so that you're doing kind of forwards compatibility with those individual integrations. And ideally, you're making sure that you're proactively engaging with those organizations, so that what they're working on, right? And it's that that's where you get some amazing kind of happy accidents, right? Where all of a sudden you're both kind of have this vision of oh, well, I really want our customers to be able to do X, Y, Z, and same perspective is shared by this partner or this integrator, and you can actually get there faster, or potentially, get there in a way that, where you really get the kind of effect of, 1 + 1 = 3, right? That's something that, that's where the magic happens, right? But, I think, kind of moving, into this kind of later stage of as you spin up these processes, as you, to your point, making them self-serve, if you can create an abstraction layer for development of integrations, you can even accelerate that further. But as you start to, look at this kind of third stage of growth of, really massive scaling and, getting into category creation and, this, massive adoption, as you kind of go further down the adoption curve, would be interested in your thoughts on how this, early work, what you're experiencing, what you've seen, how that supports this kind of later stage growth. So what are some things that you've looked at, as you've been through this a couple times, that you'd be yeah, I made sure that the next time, I'm going through this, I'm putting this in place a little bit sooner, or I'm holding off on this part a little bit later. What are some things that you can, wisdom you can pass on?
Yeah, I think one asset that sort of continues to pay off really well for developer products is if you have invested early on in building a community, that's the one thing that you don't want to lose. And you know, if you engage with them, if you have good feedback loops and you maintain your authenticity, you're going to make mistakes, by the way, as you grow, especially when you're scaling out. And if you have a good relationship with your community, you will get a hall pass along the way. And so, for example, you know, we made mistakes as we were scaling things at DigitalOcean. We had outages, we had reliability issues, you know, and developers were very, you know, forgiving and understanding because we were very authentic. We were open about what we were trying to do to improve the situation, and so that helped. The same has been true at Auth0 also, where you know, again, as you're scaling, you know, you do run into scale challenges also, and the community portion has been really helpful. In our case, actually, the community in Auth0's case, it's also been helpful from the perspective of they're really eager to try new things, right? So we've been able to use that credibility we've built to really, when we're launching lots of new capabilities or testing new features, like that's a good place to try out things. And so, you know, when we're releasing products, for example, we actually sometimes turn on a lot of new features in our freemium or free tiers so that developers can play around with them, right? And we've created a healthy loop there with them also. The other part is when you are scaling, and I think, you know, especially if you're going to sell to enterprises, is you have to start investing in reliability early on. Like every time I say, you know, we should do this earlier, I go into it and I'm like, I should have done this even earlier, right? So I think because I think if you're building developer products and if you're on the cloud, I like what Jeff from Twilio had said, is that you're really in the business of, you know, when I say like, what do we sell at Auth0, and I usually get internally answers like, oh, we're selling identity as a service or authentication as a service. And I always like to say, well, no, you're actually selling trust, right? Like, because that's the thing they're buying from you. And so there are lots of elements of trust, but obviously reliability is an important one. And so I think that's one, every company, especially they're in the growth stage, I've seen that, you know, always fall behind, and that's an area I would recommend you start much earlier in building resiliency and disaster recovery and the like. And so reliability is really important.
Yeah, I think the two that I would add to the list that you know, I've found to be extraordinarily advantageous to, you know, start doing earlier rather than later. One is compliance.
Yes, that
right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
It is so much easier to get SOC compliance when you are 15, 16 people than it is when you are 160 people.
Yeah.
And you putting those, you know, like when you start to think about like compliance standards and quality assurance standards as, you know, kind of the, you know, instruction manual on how to operate more consistently, instead of, you know, a burden that you're putting, you know, an undue burden that you're putting on your operations or, you know, infrastructure team, it changes your mindset a little bit, right? All of a sudden you realize that this is giving you the ability to move faster and more confidently, as opposed to something that is, you know, just getting in your way. Yeah. The other one that I'd say is, you know, be aware of confirmation bias. Right. And, you know, like this is something that like, you know, oftentimes comes up in the like go-to-market side of things, right? Either in your marketing or in, you know, kind of like your sales motion of like, if you're starting to think about like how you're going to scale and grow your sales organization, think about outbounding early. Right. And the reason for that is it's because like if you're only reliant on inbound, not only is there the strong potential that well is going to kind of, you know, dry up or not be able to scale the way that you need it to, but you're also going to be kind of staying within a bubble that is very comfortable. And all of a sudden you're going to start having conversations with larger organizations, whether it's because they hear about you or because, you know, you start doing that outbound, and they're going to be asking for things that have never come up before. So the earlier you start, you know, understanding, even if you get shot down and like, you know, no, you don't have what we need, at least then you know what they need, right? Yeah. You can make an informed decision of prioritization of like, are we going to build that now or not, right? But I think those are the two that, like, having been through this a couple of times, I'm just like, yeah, have those conversations with people that you just don't expect to win the deal with, but understand what their needs are.
Yeah.
And then, this notion of like doing things well, and, kind of following, best practices that you need at scale, oftentimes will help you early on to actually move faster.
Yeah.
Thoughts on that?
No, I think the compliance one, I agree. It's much harder when you're a bigger org. It's really, really painful. So starting early is good. On this notion of like talking to essentially other buyers who may not be your buyers today is really, really insightful. So I'll share some very practical examples. Like, we didn't do that at DigitalOcean because we were so reliant on the community. Mm-hmm. And so we missed a lot of the capabilities. So for example, we built a very practical example, like the Teams feature and RBAC capabilities in digital came much, much later. And the reason was we only started hearing about that when we had larger customers, and like, there's no way I can manage this infrastructure the way you've set up, because, we have the droplet page. But like, well, I have 2,000 droplets. Like, you want to scroll down? So things like that were like, oh, yeah, we didn't realize a large company would have 2,000 droplets. So same thing with team features. And same, and at Auth0, I think we had some similar insights as to, like, for example, deprecation strategies.
Yeah.
When you are dealing with the developer community, you can send them an email and say, hey, in 4 to 5 weeks, we're going to deprecate something or end up like something. Maybe you get away with that, and people can. It does not work with enterprises. You have to give like 6 month or lead times.
Or you have like a minimum commitment, or if like when I DA this, I'm making a minimum commitment that I'm going to support it for 3 years.
Correct.
And it's like, I don't even know if that code's going to exist 3 years from now.
So these are the types of things you may not be aware of, but it's good to know. And especially if customers are going to be, if you're going to be a critical part of a customer stack, like, these things become really, really important. And again, I can't understate, like, just a simple thing is deprecations in a developer community, much more easier to deal with. But when you're in the enterprise land, I mean, expect that to take a long time.
Yeah.
And like you mentioned, I think they're in some cases expected to last years too, because customers just move much more slowly.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's interesting because I think that there's another part of that, like, communication transparency, that I think would love to get your take on, that I've seen be so important, right? And that's the kind of transparency with regards to feature functionality, right? And when you have a robust and a vibrant community, you really need to be thoughtful about who you're going to build a feature for. And it's not necessarily always as straightforward as, well, who's going to pay me for it, right? Or you really need to think about it, especially for organizations that have strong developer communities. Who's going to get value from this, right? And then what is that kind of like measurement of value that is potentially monetizable, but also what is that measurement of value that is like the one that always gets me is when I see developer tool companies charge for like MFA. Like, that does not make sense to me, right? Like, this is something that is a best practice for our industry that we should be encouraging everyone to do, even individual users. And that is not something that we should be, putting behind some type of paywall. But, interested in your take on this, idea of like, how do you, either do that assessment or walk that line with the developer community that you've built to ensure that you're continuing to build that trust as opposed to tearing it down?
Yeah, I think so. I think the key is to keep your feedback channels open with the developer community. I think one of the so different approaches. I think at DigitalOcean we were very, like, it's almost like we were developing in the open. Like, every feature request was logged in there. I would go in, or the co-founders would go in and say, hey, yeah, this is coming in Q3 of next year or whatever. And it was a very active feedback loop, and it worked. And so we built, and we communicated fairly frequently about the roadmap and what's next. And in Auth0, I think it's been slightly different because we were still getting feedback from all of these channels. But, and then, sort of we have this ambassadors program where we get feedback. We get feedback from support channels, our customer success, SEs, SAs, support tickets, and obviously salespeople from the sales organization too. So we've been taking feedback from different constituents and then sort of feeding back into the roadmap and communicating that. And again, the frequency of how we communicate and the details we can, especially when dealing with enterprise. I mean, the other thing that's important to remember is, not all enterprise users are going to read your blog, right? So if you assume that you post it on the blog and it's going to work, forget it, right? Like there is so much noise, and so you have to do other things. Like I think different companies have tried to use some of these different approaches, but like you do customer advisory boards. We do lots of webinars, and that has been a good source for how our customers get insight into the roadmap. And then, user groups and roundtables. For example, if you did a roundtable for financial services or healthcare customers, and you get insights through that. So again, still focused on enabling the developer, but you have to engage with different communities too, because while developers are influencing the decision, they're not the ones who are managing the budget and writing the checks, and so making sure that the folks you are able to reach them in some other manner, because they're not going to be lurking on your blog.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. And I think the other thing to recognize is something we talked a lot about at GitHub is that developers have a lot in common, as individuals are in terms of people who love building stuff, right? But I think that something that's extraordinarily important to recognize is that the needs and the priorities of a developer that's working, independently or at a small, kind of startup or small team, are probably going to be a little bit different from those that are working in a large established enterprise company, right? And so how do you make sure that you're hearing all those voices and making sure, I love your points about, kind of building up, the kind of notion of like an advisory panel or, an ambassadors program to, be able to hear from, those individuals. I think that, we've also seen, in various roles that I've had doing kind of like outbounding surveying, or just even, having like a good user experience team or, developer experience team that is doing proactive interviewing, with folks on a regular cadence to be.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, we've invested in a research function, and we're constantly doing research, and we've also built like an research repository internally that our product teams can go and consume. And so yeah, I agree. I think that's a really important part, which is you're not going to get all of the feedback through meetings or support tickets and the like. You do have to proactively go out there and source. So that's a really good investment. I would highly recommend that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I really appreciate your time and all of your insights. Hopefully the audience has as well. But wish you the best of success, and am excited to see how Auth0 continues to kind of reach new users and take advantage of this kind of amazing organization with Okta to be able to kind of build some great solutions. So thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate it.